The Frog King, or Iron Henry. In olden times, when wishing still helped, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun herself, who has after all seen so much, was amazed every time she shone in her face. Close by the king's palace there was a big dark wood, and in the wood, under an old linden tree, was a spring. And when the day was really hot, the king's daughter would go out into the forest and sit at the edge of the cool spring-fed pool. And when she was bored, she would take a golden ball, throw it in the air, and catch it again. And that was her most beloved plaything. Now it happened one day that the princess's golden ball did not land in the little hand that she was holding up in the air, but fell aside onto the ground and rolled right into the water. The princess followed it with her eyes, but the ball disappeared, and the pool was deep, so deep that no bottom was to be seen. Then she began to cry, and cried more and more loudly, and was inconsolable. And as she was wailing thus, someone called to her, "What is the matter, princess? Why, you are screaming so that a rock might take pity on you." She looked around, wondering where the voice came from, and then her eyes fell on a frog, who was sticking his fat, ugly head out of the water. "Oh, it's you, old Splasher," she said. "I'm crying for my golden ball, which has dropped in the pool." "Hush, don't cry," answered the frog. "I can perhaps be of some help. But what will you give me if I bring your plaything back up?" "Whatever you want, dear frog," she said. "My clothes, my pearls and jewels, and the golden crown off my head, too." The frog responded, "Your clothes, your pearls and jewels, your golden crown, I do not want. But if you will love me, and let me be your friend and companion, sit at the table beside you, eat from your little golden plate, drink from your little cup, and sleep in your little bed, if you will promise me that, then I will go down and fetch you back up your golden ball." "Oh yes," she said, "I promise everything you want, if you will get me back the ball." But she was thinking, "In your dreams, you silly frog. You sit in the water all day and croak with the others. You can't ever be on a human's level." The frog, when he had received her pledge, ducked his head under, dived down, and in a little while came swimming back up with the ball in his mouth and threw it out onto the grass. The princess was overjoyed to lay eyes on her pretty plaything again, picked it up, and ran off. "Wait, wait!" shouted the frog. "Take me with you. I can't run as fast as you." But it did him little good to yell his croak, croak after her as loudly as he could. She was not listening, raced home, and had soon forgotten the poor frog, who was forced to sink back into his pond. The next day, when she had sat down at the dinner table with the king and all the courtiers, and was eating from her little golden plate, something came waddling up the marble stairs, splish splash, splish splash, and when it reached the top, it knocked at the door and called out, "Princess, youngest, open the door." She ran over to see who was outside, but when she opened the door, there sat the frog. Then she quickly slammed the door closed, sat down at the table again, and was quite afraid. The king could see that her heart was thumping mightily, and asked, "My child, why are you nervous? Is there perhaps a giant at the door who wants to carry you off?" "Oh no," she replied, "it's not a giant, but a disgusting frog." "What does the frog want with you?" "Oh, dear father, yesterday I was sitting by the pool in the forest and playing, and my golden ball fell into the water, and because I was crying so much, the frog fetched it back out for me, and because he so absolutely insisted, I promised him that he could be my companion, but I never once thought that he could leave the water. Now he's outside and wants to come in to be with me." Meanwhile there was a second knocking, and a voice shouted, "Princess, youngest, open the door. Don't you know what you said to me yesterday beside the cool spring water? Princess, youngest, open the door." Then the king said, "When you have given your word, you must keep it. Now go and let him in." She went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in, always at her heels, up to her chair. There he sat and called out, "Lift me up to be with you." She hesitated until finally the king commanded it. Once the frog was upon the chair, he wanted to be on the table, and once he was sitting there, he said, "Now move your little golden plate closer to me so that we can eat together." She did do it, but it was very clear that she did it unwillingly. The frog enjoyed the meal, but almost every bite stuck in her cruel. Finally he said, "I've eaten enough and am tired. Now carry me into your bedchamber and prepare your little satin bed. We will lie down to sleep there together." The princess started to cry, afraid of the clammy frog, whom she did not dare touch, and who was now to sleep in her nice clean bed. The king, however, lost his temper, and said, "He who has helped you in your hour of need is not to be scorned afterwards." Then she picked him up with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs, and put him in a corner. But when she was lying in bed, he came crawling and said, "I'm tired. I want to sleep as well as you. Lift me up, or I'll tell your father." Then she was taken by a fit of fury, picked him up, and threw him against the wall with all her might. "Now will you give it a rest, you disgusting frog?" But when he fell onto the bed, he was not a frog, but a prince, with good-looking, kind eyes. And now, by her father's will, he was her dear companion and husband. And he told her that he had been cursed by a wicked witch, and no one but she alone could have released him from the pond, and tomorrow they would go together to his kingdom. Then they went to sleep, and the following morning, when the sun awakened them, a coach arrived, drawn by 8 white horses, which had white plumed feathers on their heads, and were yoked with gold chains. And on the box at the back stood the young king's manservant, and he was Loyal Henry. Loyal Henry had been so depressed when his master was turned into a frog that he had had 3 iron bands bound around his heart, lest it burst for sorrow and sadness. But the coach was here to bring the young king back to his kingdom. Loyal Henry handed them both inside, climbed back up in the rear, and was full of joy at the breaking of the spell. And when they had travelled along a little way on their journey, the prince heard a crack behind him, as if something had broken, and he turned around and called out, "Henry, the coach is breaking." "No, my lord, not the coach. It is a band from around my heart, which was labouring in great pain when you were sitting in the pool, when you weren't a frog." Again, and then yet again, there was a crack as they drove along, and each time the prince thought the coach was breaking, but it was only the bands flying off Loyal Henry's heart, because his master had returned and was happy.